Welcome to Let's Play Rule the Waves 3, Germany starting in 1935. It's June 1948 and we have just completed a triumphant victory over Britain and France in a long war, which is all great. But after the heady celebrations of victory come the sobering realities of peacetime and a much reduced budget. So I've been thinking about what my fleet is going to look like, how to lower the cost of the fleet, how to give myself some construction space, and how to think about it in a coherent way so that I get to a period, and I've chosen 1955, 6-7 years from now, where I have a remodeled fleet that accounts for many of the big technological changes that are about to take place. Now, a short while back, I did ask you where you felt the emphasis was. Should I concentrate on refitting? Should I concentrate on new designs? Should I scrap and save the money? Or should I, focus on reserving and mothballing? And obviously the winner here was scrappage. And I think you're probably right. I do need to reduce the cost of the fleets, and I need to let go of ships from the 1930s and 20s who just aren't going to cut it anymore, or would require massive refits, rebuilds, really, new engines and all of that costly stuff. But since I asked this poll, my thinking has progressed. I've been in conversation with some of you and also reading some really interesting comments that you've dropped. So I'm going to have to account for a number of big transformative technological changes. So air-to-surface missiles, we already have heavy, medium will be coming along in a few years' time. And surface-to-surface missiles, the same. These heavy ones are relatively crude, not terribly long range, I think about 25,000 yards, accuracy, but they will get better. We're also waiting soon for the development of surface-to-air missiles for the air defense fleet. And all of this is going to transform the dominant way that we fight naval battles. So had we started way back then, since 1890, battles were fought on a gunnery, attritional way. So the big heavy artillery on a ship would fire their weapons and they would hit, and gradually the number of hits would overwhelm the defense of ships and they would sink. In that period, a secondary thing of volley fire from torpedoes, masses of torpedoes, or as many as you can, would rush out, try and hit some ships. If they hit, there was a strong possibility that they would just sink there and then, but it was very much a one-use weapon, or if you had reloads, perhaps two. And we are moving to a period where volley fire is going to become the dominant mechanism. Missiles are in many ways like torpedoes. You have to fire them en masse. Having fired them, you may have a reload, and then that's kind of it. And if you get hit by a missile, then it's quite likely that you won't survive. So a very different form of warfare from the gunnery warfare that we've all been used to. Submarines and ASW is also going to change. We already have a new hull form. There's a new high power sonar that's going to come along and improve things. And we're going to find that our short range ASW weapons are going to become ineffective, but not quite yet, but soon. Depth charges and little depth charge throwers off the side of a ship aren't going to cut it. In the air, obviously we already have light jet fighters, but we're going to get heavy jets and attack jets and helicopters, whilst torpedo bombers and dive bombers are already completely ineffective. And yeah, they're just massacring their poor aircrew. Finally, crew are going to change and they're going to need spacious accommodation. That's partly because the social changes of the time, people just got used to living with mod cons, whereas in the 40s and 30s, there were essentially no household aids at all. Trust me, I was a small child in the 1960s and a teenager in the 70s, almost no gadgets around. But it's also because the crew are moving from massive men with modest amounts of training to operate relatively straightforward mechanical machines. Okay, some of them are quite complicated, like, fire control tables or something like that. But in the main, relatively simple. They're now much more going to deal with high technology systems and need longer training and think more. So need more care around that. And we're going to get aluminium, or aluminum, if you will, superstructures, because topside weight and topside space is going to be at a premium. So those are the changes that are going to come along. And we're going to need bigger docks, because carriers, if we have them, are going to need to be bigger to fit these bigger planes on. So there's kind of a new design standard, and thanks to Ken here for conversations with him to help me in my thinking and in other places during this this video today. He's been there. I haven't been. I've been in up to 1955 in Ruler Waves 2, but I haven't been further. So the importance of a standard ship spec now, they've all got to have spacious accommodations. They'll all need to use aluminium when it becomes available. They all need to be reasonably fast. And crew quality has to be something that you maintain. As I said, you're looking after high-tech systems. There's no point keeping trade protection vessels with complicated sonar in mothballs and then throwing a poor or even fair crew at them. They've got to be good in order to operate them successfully. Equally, the weapons fit is now changed, that mix. So missiles are generally going to be maxed. The heavy guns that we have, they're certainly going to be retained. They're certainly, not unuseful, particularly in nighttime, particularly in poor weather, which in Europe, Northern Europe, where we are, is absolutely around a lot of the time. I live in the middle of England, near to Sherwood Forest and Nottingham, of Robin Hood fame, and we are on the same latitude as Newfoundland and sort of the middle north of Canada. We're kept warm by the Gulf Stream, thank you very much, but we have very long, dark winters and very long, bright summers too. Secondaries are going to be sacrificed for missiles. Torpedoes are going to be sacrificed for missiles, but we're always going to keep a few where we can, because torpedoes are now becoming an anti-submarine warfare weapon as well. We're not really going to feature heavy or light AA. Medium AA, radar directed, is going to be the thing that offers the best missile defense. And mines, which are also becoming anti-submarine warfare weapons, are usually also going to be maxed. So that's the kind of weapons mix we're going to keep in our new ships. So let's look at those new ships, and let's start at the top. So we are going to need new carriers. We have 4, but they are all, heartbreakingly, 39,600 tons. If I'd known about the 40,000 ton limit, under 40,000 tons, the big heavy jets and the attack jets have a storage penalty, so you just can't carry that many. Over 40,000 they don't, typical. So I'm going to need some big carriers. I can go up to 68,000 at the moment, but it would be useful to increase the dock size, or indeed build them in a friendly country to build them big. I'm going to need to create these special squadrons that will enhance the electronic warfare capabilities of the air. I'm thinking of going fighter jets only, because torpedo bombers and Dive bombers are just death traps at the moment. Obviously, as soon as we get jet attacks, then I will be deploying them. It's important to notice that the distance between fleets engaging is probably going to increase, which is going to make the surface actions harder to arrange. That's where, come nighttime, battlecruisers or heavy cruisers rush through the darkness to try and intercept carriers at night or in the dawn, as we've mentioned to do in the past. Still possible, but trickier. We still need to sink enemy CVs, and we did pretty badly at sinking enemy CVs, except through gunfire in the last war. Now, Ken did mention a really interesting line of thought away from this conventional one, which is that you should have no CVs whatsoever. Just scrap them. Save yourself 10% of your budget. I'm describing this as the Soviet option because it reminds me of the bastion defense concept that the Soviet Navy, and I suspect to a degree what remains of the Russian fleet, still have, which is that you concentrate your forces in an area to protect the land, because they're a land-based power and they're worried about St. Petersburg and the likes, and also to protect your strategic assets, which in the Soviet case obviously would be their SSBNs. So the idea is you, without carriers, have to make a conscious decision about whether to accept a battle or not. If the battle is within your cap range, fine, absolutely, go for it. If it's outside your cap range, but still within the range of your strike aircraft, well, probably, but maybe not. If it's within both of each other's strike aircraft, then you might possibly do it. If it's now outside your strike aircraft, but within the strike capability of the enemy, well, it's pretty doubtful. And if it's in the range of the enemy's cap, well, you definitely want to avoid it. This is land-based cap, fundamentally. Obviously, if they've got carrier cap, that's a different thing. Now, I've positioned this as like 5 discrete ranges. Obviously, it's entirely possible within the strictures of the Baltic Sea and the North Sea and the Mediterranean that these overlap a lot. But that's the kind of decision that you need to make. You can beef up the fleet on the money saved with more missile ships and more aircraft, and you essentially make the enemy come to you and work with your advantages. I think, in another reality, that is a very interesting concept to work with. I'm not going to work with it, but I am tempted maybe for another game, or I might leave a save of this game and see how that goes on a fork. Next, the heavies. So the battle cruisers. They are undoubtedly worth keeping. Probably not worth creating a new build, although I may investigate that. And again, feel free to contradict me in the comments and say, no, you totally should. The battlecruisers helps trigger battles from the battle generator. They're more survivable than heavy cruisers. And once they become available, I would fit them with heavy and later medium surface-to-air missiles rather than surface-to-surface missiles, because the SAMs have more reloads and they do have a secondary surface-to-surface ability, so they're very, very useful. On the other hand, heavy cruisers, it's probably worth building a few. They also help trigger battles. They're half the price of a new battlecruiser. They're more cost-effective if you are trying to chase down and destroy light cruisers, and they carry as many missiles as the battlecruiser. So you can very much think of them as battlecruiser light. For the fleet escort light cruisers, and light cruisers and destroyers are primarily fleet escorts now, build them up to their maximum 12k tonnage. Obviously spaciousness and aluminium and high speed, maximum radar, medium range for Germany is appropriate, and then weapons of surface-to-surface missiles, again possibly replaced by SAMs later. Put them in positions D, E, F, and G. That's along the side so that you're protecting the all-important centerline space. Radar-directed medium AA, triple 6-inch guns, torpedoes, long-range anti-submarine warfare weapons, a float plane, not because you really want to use the float plane, but because it's going to get replaced by a helicopter at some point. There's been discussions that helicopters are comparatively expensive in terms of the extra maintenance. And so there's a push not to have them, but let me know in the comments if you agree with that or if they're just super useful, particularly obviously because helicopters can do scouting and stuff later on, but that might be, way into the 60s. And mines. Alternatively, given it's 1948, I could just build a classic as many gun turrets as possible, light cruiser, and wait a little while and then replace those gun turrets with missiles. So here's my 1948 design for a light cruiser at the beginning of this technological transformation period. I want to highlight, so speed as much as we can. It has armor. I wonder whether this has actually any utility at all, so please comment, because if I got rid of the armor, I would be able to boost the speed and change the engine priority to normal, which would be nice. I've got a torpedo defense of 2, which is, I think handy for any underwater weapons. And of course, the accommodation is spacious. 6-inch, 9 6-inch guns. It's auto-loading, so I've increased the rounds to 250 because obviously it'll get through that with the maximum best fire control that I can do. Not dual purpose, because the utility of dual purpose 6-inch guns I think is questionable, but let me know if you think differently. 8 medium radar directed AA guns and a couple of directors. Topside space nearly at the max. And that's going to be a constant theme. Maximum radar, 30 mines. I could go all the way up to 120 if I got rid of some of this armor. And torpedo tubes for the ASW, as well as a little bit of residual surface strike. A float plane that will become a helicopter, which also necessitates, by the way, a catapult, which will get removed. And then as many surface-to-surface missiles with reloads as I can manage at this time. So very much a jack of all trades. And that's a theme, really, amongst the fleet escorts. With the destroyer fleet escort, it's a mini cruiser, really. 3,000 tons. I mean, remember the day when light cruisers were 3,000 tons? Much the same. Tempting to do short range because I'm Germany, but actually, even in the North Sea, short range will mean that you can't get to places like Iceland and things like that. So we don't want that. Weapons fit very, very similar all the way through. For the light cruiser and the destroyer, we have like a layered surface attack. So the surface missiles go out to about 25,000 yards. The 6-inch guns are closer in at about 14,000, and then the torpedoes at 13,000. Plus, of course, some ASW and mine-laying ability. So here's a destroyer. Again, let's go through this one. So 3,000. That will increase to 3,500 soon-ish. 34 knots, again, as fast as I can make it. No protection at all. Spacious accommodation. 4 6-inch guns. Couldn't fit in quite as many rounds as I could on the light cruiser, but again, auto-loading. 4 medium AA guns. Again, almost maxed on our topside capability. Some of you may say I'm shortchanging these ships by not having enough anti-aircraft artillery, and we haven't had the results through from the previous war. After a war, you get an analysis of air defense, but I would be surprised if anti-aircraft artillery contributed more than 10% or something to the number of enemy planes shot down. Maximum radar, torpedoes for surface action and ASW, no helicopter, as many missiles as we could manage. Oh, and I forgot to mention as many ASW as we can manage, which includes the short range stuff at the moment, but that might get removed in a refit later. Next up, a trade protection destroyer, i.e. not a corvette, and it's not a corvette for a slightly gamey cheat reason, which is destroyers on trade protection never get gun duels with submarines. That tedious message you occasionally get, your submarine was sunk in a, I'm comfortable with that. It's a bit gamey, but I'm comfortable with that because no submarine should have a gun in 1948 and afterwards. So it's super small, only 900 tons, spacious and aluminium, a really slow speed. Now, I'm not sure about this, so let me know in the comments if you think this will be a penalty in trade protection. Diesel engines and long range, a rubbish radar. The main point is cheap as chips to build, 2,500 for the full cost, but more importantly, 218 per month. I use the monthly cost because really that's my monthly budget, is how much can I spend every month. So oddly enough, a more expensive ship that takes longer to build but lower cost per month can often be more affordable than a cheaper ship that takes shorter to build and is more expensive per month. Weapons, all about the ASW. So as you'd expect, so ASW weapons, torpedoes and mines also as ASW weapons. No guns. For some reason, you don't need guns on destroyers. You only need torpedoes. No helicopter, rubbish radar and fire control. So these will only ever be on trade protection. Functionally, of course, they're ASW frigates or corvettes, but because of the limitations of the game's classification of ships system, I'm having to fiddle with it. So this is what it looks like. Slow speed, long range, diesel engines, reliable, spacious, of course, no guns, and none of this matters. No fire control positions. Remember to do that, otherwise that does add to the weight. No anti-air. Couple of torpedoes for the ASW, mines and ASW weapons, and that's it. And rubbish radar. Likewise, its sister class will be corvettes for the active fleet. So this is designed to keep down submarines in the combat area, but not have them hoovered up into a fleet battle, for which they're certainly not designed, which is why they're corvettes rather than destroyers. So very, very similar design. Actually, I think that 24 knots is wrong. I think I put it down to 21. Even cheaper, 151 per month. Same sorts of weapons, although oddly enough, for a corvette, you do need a gun of some sort. So this is what the corvette will look like. Again, no need for long range for these corvettes because they are focused on the fleet sea zone that you're going to be fighting, so that's fine. Spacious accommodation, one 3-inch gun. It could have been a 2-inch gun, to be honest, if you wanted to save a couple more pennies. No fire control, no AA, no torpedoes, mines and ASW weapons, as much as you can, rubbish radar. So that's the corvette to keep in your fighting fleet zones. And then finally, a mine countermeasures corvette, because mines are going to be quite important both for ASW and for sinking surface ships. So again, trying to make it cheap, 800 tons, all the usual nonsense, 158 per month to build, again, very cheap. And they just have minesweeping gear. Again, because they're a corvette, they need a minimum gun. Again, they'll only be on the active fleet, so being corvettes, they'll never get sucked up into a fleet battle. I did do a little bit of calculation. So this orange line is the number of mines carried against these growing tonnages from 600 tons to 1,500 tons. And then this blue line is the cost per month, which, as you can see, changes slightly. So I've gone for this 800 ton. You could argue, if you get your calculator, that a 600 ton would be fine as well. Or you could actually argue that a 1,500, which takes like 18 months to build, an 800 ton I think takes 11 months to build, but is cheaper per month. Depends in part on what the maintenance costs of these will be, but the maintenance cost fundamentally is all pretty low. Probably the 1,500 starts to get, double the cost, but double of not very much is still not very much, but certainly a case for an even smaller one. Here's the mine countermeasures vessel, so not very fast, spacious, tiny gun, again, could be 2-inch, no fire control, minesweeping gear and mines, no ASW. It seems to intrinsically have an ASW of 2, but that's for reasons. Here is the cost breakdown of the fleet today in June 1948. And as you can see, this is quite a difficult way to consume, but I know some of you like your numbers. But for those of you who don't, here's a nice pie chart. So with the percentages rounded, we have 7% of the fleet budget on carriers, 10% on battle cruisers, and 14% on light cruisers and fleet destroyers. So 31% on the surface fleet, nothing on minesweepers, and 1% on trade. They all got canned at the end of the war. A whopping 20% on my submarine fleet, and a whopping 27% on aircraft. So nearly half of my budget is on aircraft and submarines. You'll never guess what I'm going to be cutting. And actually quite a substantial 21% on all the support stuff. That's research, intelligence, doctrines, builds on docks, other stuff. Oh, like bases, motor torpedo boats, and all of those sorts of things. So what I would like is to take this position now. So this is this pie chart rendered as a stacked bar chart with exactly the same numbers and exactly the same categories, and go through a cost reduction program, that's the next video, that brings these percentages to these percentages. So increase the amount that I'm going to spend on carriers and on the battle cruisers, actually that's the same, greatly increase on escorts, invest in trade protection, anti-submarine warfare, mine warfare, greatly reduce the ones on aircraft and on the base support. So yeah, that's roughly the plan. There are some wiggle room, so I might not get into carriers just yet when I worked out a timeline coming in a moment. So I might invest in escorts a little bit more heavily, but that's the kind of direction. Scrapping submarines, investing in jet-capable carriers. I have 2 carriers, for example, that are not jet-capable. That means jet attacks, and heavy fighters. Mothballing the battle cruisers. Yes, I know I said it's important to keep crew quality up, but I'm making a planning assumption that we're not going to have a war until 1955, and I'm not going to refit the battle cruisers until later on, until we've had some more of these transformational technologies come through. And in the meantime, we can just mothball them and save quite a bit of money, I can tell you. Have a look at the heavy cruisers. We haven't got many, and we'll probably need to go through them one by one. For the light cruisers, just let go of anything from 1930 and before. You've done your time, 20 years now. I'm minded to end damage control training under doctrines. Let me know if you think that's a bad move. With aluminium superstructures coming and with missiles being a thing, I wonder about the effectiveness of damage control, just because the damage happens so suddenly. When damage control is done by gunfire, you get a hit and a hit and a hit, and it causes some damage, or maybe a bit of fire, a bit of flooding, and then you have a chance to pull it back. But I'm perfectly prepared to be wrong. Reduce intelligence now that we're at peace, and probably have a look at some of the basing infrastructure. You know, are motor torpedo boats a thing? Have they ever been a thing? I mean, they're cute. I like the idea of them, but aside from Italy, I don't think I've ever really seen them come into their own. So that's the cost reduction thing. Where I would like to get to is this in the short term, 48, 49, 50. Build some carriers, update the current couple that need it, reserve and modernize the battle cruisers, scrap old and build some new escorts, light cruisers and destroyers, eventually build some new ASW and scrap the existing ones, build some new mine countermeasures, scrap and later replace the submarines. I don't know whether to scrap the very most modern, the ones with the greatest survivability, but we'll have a look at that. Really cut down the number of aircraft and reduce the bases and some of the training and other associated spend. Where I'd like to get to in 1955 is this kind of fleet. And in this fleet, the surface fleet is pretty much half of the fleet budget, with the carriers and the battle cruisers and escorts and some trade protection and mine countermeasures. And then aircraft, which as war approaches will need to be increased, and submarines probably depends on who the opponent is. If Britain, you know, sticks its head above the parapet again, submarines are absolutely on the cards. If it's typically bellicose Russia, then maybe not. We will see. We're going to expand the CVs, modernize the BCs, expand the missile force, new ASW, new mine countermeasures, modernized subs only, jets only, well, aside from like patrol aircraft and stuff, and a reduced support infrastructure. So let's have a look at that timeline. How are we going to build what when? Always a tricky problem. So here's my yearage. So I'm halfway through 1948, so 49, 50 to 55. Ignore this little thing. This is just 12 months in a year just to help me with my scaling as I did this timeline. So first of all, probably in the mid-period, I'm going to build CVs 1, 2, and 3. They will each cost $4,500 per month. Working with the monthly figure, as I've mentioned, is just much easier than working with total cost or with annual budgets or anything like that. So as you can see, when we start, that's going to cost $9,000 and then, you know, 13.5 later on. I'm going to modernize the battle cruisers in the middle of the period. That's going to cost about $750 a month. And the eagle-eyed of you will notice I don't have a 5th cruiser. Obviously, that's PC4. I'm going to start construction of a couple of heavy and 4 light cruisers as a matter of urgency. Heavy cruisers, you can see, are twice the cost of a light cruiser. I'm going to constantly build fleet destroyers, AF reactive fleet destroyers. If I build 4 of them at a time, that will cost $3,400 a month. So just a continual program, because I suspect these will see the most modernization throughout the period. So several new small classes. I might build some submarines towards the end, because depending on the enemy, because they're really useful against some people. Build some mine countermeasures, corvettes in the middle period. Build some corvettes for ASW with the active fleet in the early period. Towards the end, build some small destroyers for trade protection. And increase the number of aircraft on active service. That's going to cost about 3,000 towards the end or whenever war looks likely. And take out of reserve and put into active fleet anything that I have used reserve. I'm not planning to mothball except for the battle cruisers in this period, but after I've modernized them, I might put them in reserve, for example, just to keep the costs down, and then plan a fleet exercise towards the end. And that should all cost these kinds of numbers. So 16,600 a month in 49, the same in 50, going up to 16,751, 16,952, and in 53, 17,000 in 54, and a bit of a splurge to 21,600 in 55, probably using some of the saved up funds for the extra splurged. So, for example, I haven't included the cost of a fleet exercise in here. That's the plan. Obviously, it depends on my various potential enemies cooperating and not deciding to have a war with me earlier. I mean, that's partly up to me to manage the diplomacy and not get too aggressive. You can see the amount I spend is increasing over time as tensions rise, the budget will rise. I've been conservative here, so it's entirely possible that I might be able to get the monthly funds up to something like 20,000, particularly if I'm aggressive and just scrap the whole submarine fleet for the moment. So, yeah. I might look at that again once I've had your feedback on these plans and what you think, and once I actually comb through every unit in the fleet and decide what to save, what to scrap, what to mothball, and what to start as new construction. So that's what the future looks like, potentially. Please let me know your ideas, and I will incorporate them into our next video and start putting into effect something along the lines of this plan here. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. Sorry it took a long time, but as you can see, a lot of effort went into this one to try and get ourselves on a steady, grounded pair of feet for a fleet for 1955 and a new age that is coming. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.